Hi, Raghu is back. I am back with Roshi Joan Halifax, who is many things to me. Certainly a mentor, a teacher, a friend, and shall we say, co-lover of Ram Dass. And well, you used to come. What did you used to say when you'd come to the house and we were staying there around whatever, working with Ram Dass? You'd say, "I've come for my heart transplant," right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'd say, "I've come for my heart transplant." And then when we were, hanging out for a few more days, then I would propose marriage. And then he would cringe. And but the last time that we were together in the flesh, so to speak, he proposed marriage to me.
He did.
And I cringed.
Oh, that's so sweet. So sweet. So I would love, I said before we got on, just to share that love of Ram Dass. But one of the things that I have never heard from you, you've never shared with me, I've just never gotten around to it or whatever, but it's an appropriate moment. And that is your absolute first recollections of meeting Ram Dass, and then whatever, shall we say, marked events with Ram Dass that happened over the years. We are, as I mentioned, we're working on a book called Remarkable Encounters with Ram Dass. So we'd love for you to share that through that medium and also where we are right now. So yeah, when did you first meet Ram Dass, and what was that like?
I married Stanislav Grof, who was the, I married Stanislav Grof in 1972, right? It was a very interesting encounter with my husband, who was from Czechoslovakia and who worked with LSD as an adjunct to psychotherapy with dying people. And so it was through Stan that I met Ram Dass, and that was in the early 70s after Ram Dass came back from wherever he was in India, doing his thing.
He was right here where this picture, that's where he was.
Okay, yeah. So, and it's one of those things, Stan is a very unusual person. He was very unusual then, kind of reserved, sort of old-fashioned Czechoslovakian. But, I had this feeling, so, maybe Ram Dass and Stan didn't exactly click, but I felt this immediate connection. Yeah. I felt like, I had met my sort of elder brother, and I think part of it's because Ram Dass was such a tease. You know what I mean? And Stan was such a not tease. So it was kind of like meeting my older brother or somebody I just could get along with. Of course, there was this a really important connection that we had around psychedelics, but also around spirituality in general. And also R.D. Ram Dass, we call him R.D., was super smart and, well-educated. And so I was interested in his mind, too. I was interested in his heart. But, he was just a very fun, impish person where I had this kind of resonance. And I had the feeling, I'm not exactly sure of the physical place where we met. I don't recall. It was so long ago. But I had that feeling that I just remember the feeling of the meeting that I would be his friend forever. And and that forever, of course, turned into another kind of forever, which is, he's our ancestor now. And so it is. And, we knew death was coming, but actually it was for years we knew death was coming. And I remember year after year, Dasima would call him the comeback kid, because he'd have this thing and just about die, and that thing and just about die. And, he just had some kind of spirit. It wasn't that he didn't want to go. It was more like he had work to do, further work, not on himself, but really for others. So,
yeah. No, but in those early days, and I remember because we met. It was in Santa Fe around Ram Dass, and in those early days, he started to do a lot of work actually around death and working with the dying people and so on. And this was also a major theme in your teaching life as well. Do you recall how you came together around that?
So, Raghu, I remember in, I think it was 80 or 1980, 81, Ram Dass and I were invited up to, it was at Eugene, Oregon, to do a benefit for Chagdu Tulku Rinpoche and Gyaltro Tulku Rinpoche for their projects. And it was around being with dying. And of course, Ram Dass had this extraordinary history of working with dying people. And he was very deeply connected with Stephen Levine and Dale Borglum. And both of whom were Stephen's gone. Dale actually went to Mount Kailash with me a long time ago. But there was this kind of space that Ram Dass held around care of dying people that influenced so many of us. And it was, to bring spirituality back into the dying process. And so, it was sort of a perfect fit. There we were in Eugene with those wonderful lamas talking about death and dying. And I felt like, that work combined with his work in the prison system, because that was something else that he was very much a part of. And he was like the first guy doing this kind of stuff. He was like our big uncle, if you will, or our grandfather. He wasn't that much older than me. But anyway, it was one of those times where you're meeting somebody who's, where there's, you have a lot to learn. And, I think that the sort of work that Stan and I did in using LSD as an adjunct to psychotherapy was really important work, because it taught us so much about the human heart, the human mind, and it was very dramatic and, sort of death, rebirth theme, a kind of hero's theme, and so on. That's great. The other side of the equation, of course, is that Ram Dass brought another kind of spirituality or kind of heart feeling into the work. And I think that was very important for Stan and for myself, of course, for Dale and Stephen, that this more spiritual ground and less, sort of Jungian archetypal, but really having to do with love. So he brought that into focus for us. And he kept that, throughout his lifetime.
Yeah, his advisal was always sit bedside with people who are dying and become like a loving rock.
I know.
Right?
I know. It's just the best.
Really?
I love that image of the loving rock. Yeah. And it's sort of loving rock. But, I will say that he had the kind of capacity for offering presence to people, no matter what, people who were just so annoying. And he would be there, the same as people who were not annoying. And that was a very good lesson for me. It's like, oh God, I've been in some interactions and I think, oh my God. But then, I just have to think about RD, and there he is with this kind of his beautiful blue eyes glistening and totally resting in presence.
Yeah. You know what? You've just described my day to day. I get the influx of mail to Love Serve Remember Foundation, and there are some questions or asking for advice or something, whatever it may be, that I look at and I go, "Are you really? Jesus, God, no!" And then exactly what you described pops up. There he is with those beautiful blue eyes that you said, and just presence, and everyone deserves respect, without saying it. He never even said that to me. He'd just look at me when I'd say something like that. There's this note that I got from somebody. He just looked at, I didn't even get through the damn thing knowing what the answer is. Be here for that person.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable. Now, but let's just say back to the beginning days of knowing him and getting closer to him. He comes, by that time, I think you were already practicing Zen and were, maybe, how long? It wasn't that long after that you and Stan parted company, I think, right?
Right, yeah. But, RD was totally not a Zen person. He could give a flying hoot about Zen. He was a kind of Hindu lover to the core.
Hindu lover.
He was a real bhakti, and Zen is not a bhakti trip. So I think the reason why he and I were so fun together is that we were so different. And we had kind of, he had his cult and I had my cult, and that was all fine. I learned a lot from being in his presence, with him, bringing forth this bhaktic element. And I think that he learned a lot, being in my presence, because I have this kind of incisive clarity at times. And so, it was good. It was a wonderful combination. I feel, at least from my point of view, I had so much fun. And, he would tease me and I would tease him. And we were perfectly public about our peculiar interactions with each other. It was good.
Yeah. Just to let everybody out there know, the relationship was so beautiful to watch. So much love. Way beyond Zen, Bhakti, nothing to do with that. It had to do with just the core being connecting on that level. It was quite something. That's why I said co-lovers at the very beginning. Now, but there is another element, and it was a real element, and it kept going on for many, many years. I saw it, and you experienced it, and, Ram Dass's whole thing, and he'd talk about, as soon as he'd start to talk about souls, then he'd take a look at Roshi, or whoever other of our Buddhist friends who might be there, as if, I'm sorry I had to say that word, it's terrible, but it was so strange. But so through all of that connectivity, of course, he was constantly introducing Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaji. Pictures of him everywhere, wherever he was.
Yeah.
His presence was always discussed. Ram Dass's deep connective faith in Guru and so on. And this is not part of Zen tradition. And so tell me, just how did you, when you probably first started, you didn't know who Ram Dass was before Stan introduced you, did you?
Well, I probably did, actually. Yeah. I think he's a cultural icon,
right.
By in the 60s, definitely. And, I was pretty out there in the 60s myself. So, but, I love one of the things he used to say is, from role to soul.
Yeah.
And but he also knew that I, as a Buddhist, I'm not into the soul thing, but I am sort of into the soul thing, because I said in one of my books that the notion of a soul, like, for example, soul singers, or when you look into someone's eyes and there's a kind of depth there, a depth of care, a depth of character. So that's what I equate with soul. And I think he did too. So I have a feeling we weren't so far apart, but he was so into the soul thing that it just became, in a way, a kind of joke between us, because he knew the soul thing is not necessarily the Buddhist thing. So, like when he would do the loving awareness, thing, I am loving awareness. And it would be, he would be the loving and then I would be the awareness. Or, he would sort of tease about, being, he wouldn't say soulless, but he'd say soul, but he'd say soul in such a way it was like a little bit of a dig.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved it. I mean, frankly, just a sweet little harmonious relationship is just my idea of a dreadful situation. I think people enjoyed us together because we could tease each other without having sappy mercy interfere with it.
Sappy mercy. Oh, Lord. All right. Well, okay. But that other ingredient of Neem Karoli Baba, what was happening to you? Because you were constantly if you were around Ram Dass, that was in your face, so to speak. And what was your own experience of not just what his was, but who is this being? And, reflecting out of these pictures.
It's funny. Neem Karoli Baba was so homely. I always was fascinated by the thing with him, because I didn't go to Kanchi. I never met him, but I love his followers. But he's this kind of big, homely, sort of smiley, sneery Hindu guy, and I was like, well, that's so interesting. But how I felt Baba was not as this entity in history or time. I really felt Baba through his successors, so to speak, or through his students, through you, through Ramesh, through Danny, through Ram Dass, of course, Mirabai, and others that, Baba shone through the people who loved him. And so, the thing that was interesting for me was this kind of unconditionality that seemed to percolate through the personalities of the people who went to Kanchi or wherever Baba was and spent time with him. And that made me love Baba, Baba. I loved Baba through his people.
Sweet. You know what, though? I'll remind you of something. Many years ago, I can't remember the circumstance. I think maybe Duncan Trussell was there, and we were chatting on a podcast of some sort, something. And I asked you this question, just, what do you see when you look in that picture of Neem Karoli Baba? And you stopped for a minute, and you then said, empty. I see empty. And then
that was pretty good.
Yeah. But then not long before that, actually it was you and I think Frank and Ramesh they were doing some kind of thing in Ram Dass's house, and Ram Dass just started recalling his connection to Maharaji, and he got welled up with emotion, just love. And then he stopped. And he just kept going over and over. He's saying one thing. He was so empty. He was so empty. And I've always, in my own being, connected these both of you in this way that to me absolutely cuts through soul of Hinduism and Buddha mind of Buddhism, however which way you want to call it, into a much, a deeper place and maybe a little bit more the commonality, because there can only be one thing in my mind. There, it can't be, oh, they're right about souls. No, they're right about no soul. To me, emptiness, because it was my experience too. There's nothing coming back at you. There was no, the subject object thing was gone, which is funny because that's what bhakti yoga is, right? For the student, And by the way, in that same day when I said to you, when we talked about this, and I talked about being in the subject object teaching, shall we say, and you said, well, one day you'll get through that. You'll get through that. You'll pass through being in that kind of relationship as a necessary thing for a while. It's good. And I said something like, well, Roshi, that's fine for you. You've had 1 billion more practice sessions or something, right? I'm just getting on with it in comparison, and you poo-pooed me. But yeah, emptiness.
Yeah, that's the game of it. Game of it for me is emptiness and interconnectedness. There's just this weave of connection that arises out of the opposite of contraction, which is not empty, but is about being in a defended space. So, yeah.
Before we leave Ram Dass, we're not leaving him, but before we move on maybe to another subject that I wanted to bring up with you, is there just a little anecdote of something that pops into your mind of the kind of playful exchange, situational thing that you happen to be with Ram Dass that just pops up? Part of our little storytelling here.
Well, this isn't funny, but I thought it was very sensitive of him. I have a wonderful assistant, Noah Kigaku Rossiter, and a really beautiful person inside and out. And he visited with Ram Dass a number of times because, I went and he went. And, he's a young guy and has a lot going on in his life. And, here I am, this old lady, sort of dragging him around to these old people who are remarkable, but still, and he doesn't have any of the history of the 60s or 70s or 80s. He was born in 85, so what? And, but I could tell he was, he felt something in Ram Dass that he just loved. And one day we were at breakfast, and I was feeling Ram Dass's life ebbing, that he would be gone sooner or later, and also, every moment that I could spend with him, I gave my full attention to him and really tried to love him and offer him love and also learn from him. But I could see my assistant was a little bored. It's just old people talking about this weird stuff. And not realizing what a treasure Ram Dass was and is. And then Ram Dass began to talk to Noah. And it was very kind of an intuitive thing on his part, saying basically, do you know how lucky you are? You're, helping this person. and so on and so forth. And I think it was, really came out of his own experience of the death of his mother, and then the death of Neem Karoli Baba. And what he was saying is that we should offer ourselves to these relationships that are important to us and not take them for granted. And I actually videoed Ram Dass, my little iPhone, talking to Noah about this. And for me, it was very, very moving, because it wasn't just about a young man's sort of relative disinterest and a couple of old people celebrating all the time like Artie and I did. But it really, it had to do with, us cherishing this life, these relationships, and not taking anything for granted. So that was good. That was really good. Yeah.
Beautiful moment.
Very touching. I have it somewhere.
Really, I'd love to have that. Well, I'd love to see it, rather.
Yeah. I'll ask Noah. It's on my iPhone, this thing here.
Try and find it, yeah.
Somewhere. Yeah. It's very moving. And I think it was, I think it, I have a feeling that Noah really heard it. That was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And, Noah could have cycled out. Young people do that all the time. And, the opposite has happened. He's actually not cycled out. He's deeply embedded in Upaya with my students who are now becoming his students. And it's it's a nice thing.
Oh, beautiful.
But I think he heard RD in a very interesting way.
Just at one point also, we were, this is a completely different time, we were at Ram Dass's house and we were having dinner, a few of us. And it was the first time I brought a Duncan trussel to meet Ram Dass.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. Oh, my God.
And his mother had just died. And he was going through all of that. And he asked both of you to give some feedback to him, and Ram Dass did. But he was taken by this. And this kind of is a segue for me in this little chat with you to what's going on today. And what you said to him was the necessity. You may not have been, that pointed, but the reality of the mystery and embracing the mystery. And this is something that I'd love for you to just talk about a little bit, because we are all, aside from the esoteric meaning of that, how about the exoteric meaning in terms of this pandemic that nobody really seems to know? There's no handle on it, right? All the way to developing a vaccine, to they don't know what's working, what happened in one country over another, how long it's going to be, what's going to talk about a mystery, in the external sense. But talk about it in the sense of us embracing something within ourselves.
I think this is such an important question, because, as you said, Raghu, we're living in a flow of radical uncertainty. And what it's teaching us, I feel, which is a very profound lesson, is the truth of emptiness that and groundlessness, that we can really not control anything. We don't know what will happen in the next moment. And I think this is really when we're in this unfiltered immediacy, we're in the mystery. That's the mystery. We don't know. And a good friend of Ram Dass's was Glassman Roshi, Bernie Glassman, who was my teacher, my Zen teacher, my last Zen teacher. And this was something I feel that Bernie really had settled inside of himself into this quality of spaciousness, of radical openness, what Suzuki Roshi called beginner's mind, that of not knowing, resting with not knowing. And it's so important because it's true. We cannot know. And I think that, Ram Dass carried that spirit. He was, I always feel in a state of, he was perpetually surprised. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
He just, like he was a kid. And that kind of surprise is really important for us to actualize now, because boy, are we surprised. Whoa. But our surprise at this point is, of course, characterized by a great deal of unrest. We're afraid of what's ahead. We want to know. We need answers. We're basically prediction machines. Yeah. So it's, I think the empty quality of Neem Karoli Baba, and also Baba's, Baba actually, he was empty, but he was also full of love, And we're in it right now, the empty part. We can't know. We're in radical uncertainty. But on the other side, if there's any distrust, if there's a contraction, then we're in this situation of trying to give shape and form to something that is emerging, that is in process. By the way, which is always in process, which is always emerging. So we're in this emergent mystery.
Yeah. Something else you have talked about. I mean, so many people there's devastation on the level of losing, or being sick, obviously first, but then losing work, feeding families, and so on. And of course, this radical uncertainty of when all of that will change. Will there be any kind of normalcy after that? And so there's a lot of loss of any kind of hope, which is a tough word altogether. And you and I have talked about this before, and you've written something about it, and you called it wise hope. And I think it would be advantageous to go further into what that really is to you and how people can work with it in a way that's going to alleviate some of the suffering.
Well, it's a great question, Raghu, because I think that from the point of view of Buddhism, we sort of look at hope and fear as nemesis. Hope is about the what we really want to happen and how we can make it happen, and so on and so forth. And fear is also a nemesis. So I got very interested in this notion of hope because hope always bothered me. And in actuality, I didn't even think about thinking about hope until I was asked to give a talk at Sojiji Monastery in Japan, and on the theme of hope. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm this Zen person, old time Buddhist. I'm not into the hope thing, and it just didn't seem very Buddhist to hope to me. And and it certainly in today's situation where the economy is in worse shape than it was during the Great Depression, and where 250,000 or more people have died and millions have been diagnosed with this virus, and we're in the middle of this global pandemic, and we're in a real crisis that's existential, the heart and mind. We just don't know what is ahead of us. And we see that, the medical system is facing, unprecedented challenges. And the whole situation is happening in the space of our climate catastrophe, which is related to it. Hope? Are you kidding? But, I also remembered a line from Suzuki Roshi that it says, life is like stepping onto a boat which is about to sail out to sea and to sink. It's like, yeah, that is a pretty catastrophic perspective, which is not unreal. And we seem to be sinking. And I think that the sinking feeling, not just the sinking of the Tao and the sinking of our, everything that's happening around us, but it's coloring the world for many people. And, I really couldn't, Raghu, say the word hope without feeling like I was betraying reality.
I know.
But then I got asked to do this talk, and then I remembered a book by my good friend Rebecca Solnit, Hope in the Dark. And I was like, you know what? Hold on. I need to look at hope again. And I began to explore hope in terms of what hope isn't. And, I saw hope is not the belief that everything is going to turn out all right. It's not that at all. We know people die, populations die. Boy, do we know that right now. We know that whole civilizations die. Look at the Roman Empire. We also know planets die. Look at Mars, and stars die. The boat is going to sink. And also, if we look at what's happening today, we see the evidence of suffering all around us, of injustice, of futility, of harm. And, the virus is a really strong case in point. I mean, who knew? Certainly not most of us. But we have to understand, Raghu, that hope is not a story that's based on optimism, that everything's going to be okay. Optimists believe that everything's going to turn out positively. And this view, I believe, is a very dangerous view, because it means that we don't have to bother. Because, everything's going to turn out fine. And the same is true with being a pessimist. There are a lot of pessimists around. And so, pessimists take refuge in apathy, or apathy that's driven by cynicism. And, neither optimists or pessimists really have to do anything. They're completely excused from engagement.
Exactly.
But I got really moved by some words from the writer Barbara Kingsolver. It's an American novelist. And she said, I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between being optimistic and being hopeful. And then she went on, she said, I would say that I'm a hopeful person, although not necessarily optimistic. And that really caught my attention. And then she said, here's how I would describe it. The pessimist would say, it's going to be a terrible winter. We're all going to die. And the optimist would say, oh, it'll be all right. I don't think it'll be that bad. And then the hopeful person would say, maybe someone will still be alive in February, so I'm going to put some potatoes in the root cellar, just in case. And then she wrote, hope is a mode of resistance. Hope is a mode of resistance, and we are in it. It is, we're resisting right now prediction. We're resisting optimism, and we're resisting great pessimism. So, earlier, Raghu, I was talking about radical uncertainty, and I think that's where wise hope really rises up, really shows up, because we understand that hope that is wise is rooted in the unknown and the unknowable. And we are sure in it right now. And it's a very interesting process to, be dancing on the edge of futility, but actually to be lifted up again and again into a perspective that is characterized by wisdom and hope, and that metabolizes care. So we're just not sort of falling like a lump of dirty laundry in some corner somewhere. We keep showing up no matter what. I thought potatoes in the cellar. I thought that is hope as a manifestation of wisdom and caring. And it's also an expression of resistance to futility and sappy positivity. And I think wise hope requires that we open ourselves to that which we really can't know, and to be surprised, to be perpetually surprised. Yeah.
And
I don't know. Does that make sense to you at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much that in there for us to embrace. Absolutely. And it leads me to something, before we leave each other. Your last, how do we put into effect? Let's just we talked about a couple of things here. Wise hope and embracing radical uncertainty, embracing the mystery, right? We're talking about a perspective, an attitude, as part of the Eightfold Path, some effort, right? Effort has to go in. And so it led me to think about the last book it's just last year or maybe year before, I can't remember, about edge states. And, this leads us into being able to get with some methodology, be it perspective or actual practice. Well, methodology of perspective is practice to me, mindfulness. But talk about the edge states and give everybody a bit of a handle. I know we've talked about it before, but I think it's worthwhile in this moment.
Well, you're asking too much, I think, for the time that we have. But
right. It's like I asked Joseph hey, Joseph, you got an hour? Joseph Goldstein came to one of the retreats. He said, "What?" He was doing an hour and a quarter talk or something. He said, "What should I talk about?" I said, "Talk about mindfulness. That big fat book of 600-700 pages." He said, "Yeah, very funny," but he actually he got it in. Joseph is so great. We love him.
Yeah.
So whatever comes to mind that you think would give some kind of leverage over the, unsticking ourselves from those stories that prevent us from embracing uncertainty, the mystery.
Well, I think one thing that's really important, Raghu, right now is that we recognize that we are fragile, we're vulnerable, we all have feet of clay, that even the most altruistic or empathic or high integrity, respectful, or engaged person that we know is, standing on an edge that could collapse under their feet. And what is the, if you will, the fulcrum or the function that transforms this experience of failure and suffering for all of us who are, we're just human beings, is compassion. And I think that this is really, we've all done, been in the great city square of mindfulness and been blessed by, the practice of mindfulness. But at this point in our world, I think the most important thing to do is to actualize compassion. not only for the benefit of others, but to transform the delusions that beset us. So I think that's it in a nutshell. That's what an edge state is. It's that, falling over the edge into the abyss, down into the muck and the mire. And what brings us out of that depth of suffering, humiliation, and failure is this love and care for the world. And we make our way back up to the high edge of goodness.
But is it not true it's very difficult for people in general to send that compassion and love here inside? And until that happens, it's a very tenuous proposition, no?
I don't know. I know some people who don't like themselves, but are really wonderful in their service to others. So I don't want to lay that as a rule for, this is how it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But in general, though, how about a little bit of actualization of developing, cultivating compassion?
Well, I think the beginning is, in fact, this capacity for us to be really deeply present with others and for others. And that only happens when we're in a concentrated state where we can really give our attention fully to another. And then behind that attention, of course, is our capacity to discern suffering. What's going on there? And if our attention is fragmented, it's very difficult for us to see things realistically. And then what comes behind that, of course, is when you see the truth of suffering, is care. You're not going to, first you have to perceive suffering. So that has to do with attentional balance. And then comes caring, concern. And that is really critical in our experience, our capacity to actually be pro-social, role to soul. And then from that is, again, asking the question directly, or at least on the preconscious level, what will really serve here? What will serve to alleviate this person's suffering? And hopefully that discernment is characterized by clarity, and then there's action coming from that discernment that is congruent with what that person really needs. So, I just that's a kind of narrative overview of compassion. I think it's an important one because right now, our attention has been colonized by many impulses coming through our digital world, which is basically controlled by the corporate world. And our capacity to see things clearly has definitely been warped, fragmented. And also our sort of huge self-concern and am I okay and am I going to survive makes it difficult often for us to really actualize care in a principled and loving way. So I think we're at a kind of, what can I say, a sort of phase shift. I think that we have now an extraordinary opportunity for reflection as per being in the middle of this pandemic and then this economic meltdown, to turn our attention toward what is important in our lives. And just as my relationship with Ram Dass was manifesting a kind of love in action, it was, two deep friends, people who cared so much for each other. And even though he's gone in the body now, he still is active in my life, as my friend. And as an inspirator and as a conspirator and as a teacher of what it is to offer compassion in a world that is really vulnerable right now. So we're in the stew. And it's time to put the potatoes, if you will, not in the stew, but in the root cellar,
In the root cellar.
because a few of us might be alive next year. Who knows?
Can I beseech you to just before we get off, just a few minute meditation or invocation or prayer or something for everybody?
Sure. Let's see what would be helpful. What for me, I think what I'd like to do is to touch into gratefulness. And there's so much about grief and so on, but I feel that we also have to keep sending gratefulness to the world, no matter how difficult our circumstances are. So I'd begin with gladdening the heart with a deep inhale and a relaxed exhale. And then reflect on these phrases. May I be grateful for this life. All of it, not just some of it. The hard parts, the terrible parts, the beautiful parts. May I be grateful for this life. And may I be grateful for all those who are in my life, my friends, my enemies. And may I be grateful for all of the lessons that have been given to me, the beautiful lessons and the hard lessons. May I use them well, and may I be grateful for them. And may I be grateful that I have the heart to serve. Yeah, may I be grateful that I have the heart to serve. Thank you, Raghu.
Oh, thank you, Roshi, and
inviting me to be with you and to remember our good friend.
Yeah, and certainly ending on "May we have the heart to serve" is embodies Ram Dass so much. Oh, thank you, and everybody out there. Of course, much of what we're mentioning, even books and Roshi's books, and they'll all be available in the show notes. You'll be able to follow through, and
a link, please, to Upaya.
Absolutely,
we are just doing it here.
Yeah, and we should make more mention than what Roshi Upaya, the service that it has performed over many, many years has been such an important contribution and offering, and has been in New Mexico for a very long time, and now as are many of our institutions, it needs support. So we will put a link in there, Roshi, to allow people to connect with you and Upaya and help out. So for sure. This is Mindrolling on the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and we shall see you again. Namaste.